With us today is Ken Plasse, who's the CEO of Fishpeople. We've got Brad Barnhorn with Barnhorn Growth Advisors, and I think we just call him like official board member on his title. And then we have John Foraker, who's the co-founder and CEO of Once Upon a Farm. Thank you guys so much for being with us. So to start, I just want to get a feel for where everybody in the room is. So how many of you have a board currently? Okay. And how many of people have a board where there's like investors who put money into the company on their board? Okay. So now turning to our panelists, I'd love for each of you to quickly introduce yourselves and maybe give us some insight into what your company board looks like or boards that you sit on. And just as a forewarning, we're going to use the word boards a lot today, apparently. Don't take a shot every time I say that.
Hey, hi, I'm John. So I've been a CEO for a long time. I've had three private companies, a public company, and currently a private company. And the ownership of those has ranged from 5 or 6 angel investors at one point to Series A type investors, B and C, and then obviously public shareholders and all the stuff that goes with that. And right now, Once Upon a Farm is a refrigerated fresh baby food, kid nutrition brand that we're growing, and we have professional investors in there in a Series A and B. And it's a very classically structured board with a couple seats for financial investors, some experienced people. I'm industry experienced people. I'm on it, and I've always tried to be very thoughtful about what do you want to get from a board, and I think it depends a little bit on your experience as CEO, the type of experience you need around you. But for me, I want a lot of diverse opinion. I want honesty, transparency, enough experience that they understand that everything never works perfectly, no matter how hard you try or how good you are, and people who just don't freak out. And I've had boards that have had all the opposite of those things that I want. so that's my background. I'll build off that later.
You're on.
It's on? Okay,
Yeah.
great. It's pretty well to look at because this is like performing at the Grammys, like where the audience is as talented and knows as much as the performers. So it's a pretty incredible room of people around everybody. So Brad Barnhorn, and about 7 or 8 years ago, not really by plan, I became a full-time board person in my career. I'd come out of a management consulting background 25, 30 years ago, built a company in this space in the late 90s that I merged with Naked Juice back in 2000 that Pepsi then bought. And for me, board work became sort of a marriage of, I do love building companies, but I was so exhausted after selling my company, I swore I'd never run a company again. And yet I love building companies. So I sort of get the opportunity to work in partnership with some, I'm on the board of Fishpeople, and 7 other companies currently, and have the chance to work closely with CEOs and share that journey, but also be able to keep a bit of a dissonance from it. And be able to, at any one time, look across, all the companies I work with are going through the same challenges ultimately about how to raise capital, how to build a great management team, how to drive margin improvements, how to innovate in the right businesses, when to lean into growth versus when to focus on the core. They're all the same core questions. So I get the rare opportunity to have 8 journeys going concurrently and skip between them and bring those frameworks between the companies. Was there a follow-on question we were covering in terms of?
We're just starting off.
Let me just start with that and hand off to Ken.
It is a room that actually has a lot of experience, and I've called some people in this room for advice on boards, actually. And I think, real quick on Fishpeople, we provide pure, sustainable, traceable seafood, and then we do it in wildly simple and delicious formats. We're vertically integrated, so that means we have to have our own landings where our fish come in. We have to have our own processing, and we have to be our own brand on the front end. And I think the perspective today that I'll bring, given who we have here in the room and the board, is I joined Fishpeople when it was basically a family office with a pretty immature board. And now we've gone through multiple rounds and had to mature our board over time. And we all want the same things in our board. I think you want someone that's going to add tremendous value and that's going to be calm, because it doesn't go perfectly when you have those tough moments. You want diversity. You want it to balance your team and the strengths you have, but you don't get to always pick your way perfectly. And I think how you balance that with those board members that come from the investment side with your independence has been important for my journey, and I think important for Fishpeople. And it took me 8 months to recruit Brad. And I think you just kind of have to find the place to say, hey, what are you good at? And where is your company? And do the best you can with it. And it continually morphs. It's definitely, even in the 3.5 years I've been at Fishpeople, the board's changed fundamentally every round. So I'll provide that perspective today.
And John, one of the inspirations for this session was a post you made on LinkedIn, which if you have not read, go to LinkedIn, go to his profile, look at posts, scroll back, it's not too far back, and it is just like a master class in a letter that you sent to your board when you joined Once Upon a Farm. What inspired you to write that? You said, you were hearing from entrepreneurs this was a struggle. What was kind of the feedback you were getting?
So I've done a lot of speaking. I've been in the industry for a long time, and it's such a common question. Like, how do I manage a board? How do I get the best out of a board? How do I manage to get great people on my board? So it was so common, and I was at talking to some people from a portfolio companies of a venture fund that I'm friendly with, and I got that question, and I was just like, well, maybe I should just like send them the email that I just wrote to my board. And what I did was when I got to Once Upon a Farm in September last year, I thought it would be a great idea, having made a lot of mistakes with boards and just getting off to right start, is like to just lay the expectations. What are my expectations for a board? What should their expectations of me be? And I won't do the article, but there's just a couple core principles. The CEO's job is to run the company, and everybody should be clear about that. The board's job is to provide really strong governance to make sure that the CEO is doing that and also running the company well. And then there just needs to be a lot of transparency and trust and really good communication, and we're all on one team, even when things aren't working well. And I think when people embrace that, and I just think your odds of having a really great culture are much better. And I've run companies that had great cultures that potentially got derailed by a really bad board culture. And I believe that you cannot have a great company culture and a bad board culture. You can have a bad board culture for a short period of time and survive it, but if you have bad board culture, it will affect the company culture and you're gonna be toast. So that was why I did it, and please read it, and if you guys have a lot of experience, add your ideas to the end and help make it better. That'd be great.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that is that the board gets built into this sort of mystical element in a lot of companies, but for a CEO, the way you probably manage your board probably has the same characteristics as probably how you manage your team ultimately, or how you manage your own sort of work, in the sense of if you are someone who is transparent and is not concerned about who gets credit and you just want to get to the right answers, that's probably going to permeate how you manage your team, just like you manage your board. So, I think CEOs often make the board into something they don't want it to be by not being comfortable with it, by getting concerned that they are going to be judged or assessed all the time. I think a good CEO comes to his board and says, hey, here's what I see happening. Here's the big dynamics in our space. Here's what's shifting. Here's where we performed. Here's where we didn't. Here's the actions I want to take to fix where I didn't perform, versus coming and trying to protect themselves, i.e. from, sometimes, I've said this to different CEOs I work with, the longer the board deck, normally means you're trying to cover something up. I hate to say it. I mean, normally you get in a board meeting in 5 minutes go, here's the 3 things we got to work on. Instead of being like, we're working really hard, we're doing this analysis, try to build up all that sort of, we're doing all these, we're trying our best, but da-da-da-da-da. Just come out with it. Be straightforward. That's all the board wants. They don't like to try to have to dig and discover what you're trying to talk about. Just that upfrontness and clarity of what you want from them, what's challenging the business, what's shifting in the competitive environment. That's all I want as a board member. Just give me something to work with so I can serve you and help you. Don't try to cover up the issues in the business and make me look at the things you want me to see over here that make you feel like I'm not going to be upset at you, because I'm not going to be upset at you. I just want to support you.
There's a lot of follow-up questions I have to both of those, so we're just going to unpack all those a little bit. So you referenced, the role of the CEO is to run the company, and the role of the board is to sort of govern. How do you make those roles separate? How do you make sure that your board understands that your role as CEO?
I just think it's being clear that that's the way it's supposed to be. It does not mean that a CEO knows all the answers. That's what, I mean, not only why you have a board, but why you have a network of people that you can reach out to and say, hey, I've been doing this a long time, but this is a new challenge for me. I don't know what to do here. That's where you want the board's experience to come in. And there will be times, obviously, too, where a board, you've got somebody who's got some really good operating experience or understanding of what to do, and they'll see something that you're doing. Even if you're an experienced CEO, you may say, hey, they may have a better idea. And there's nothing wrong with suggesting that either, especially in the context of a board and saying, hey, I think this is a great idea. It's just that when you have, sometimes you have people who come onto boards, and it happens a lot in really young companies. Sometimes when you have a really young CEO, obviously, and then also in really young companies where you have people who really want to push it along, and they start getting a little bit there's, roles get crossed and it gets confusing. The team members don't know who's really running the place. It can be really, really bad. So I think setting expectations up front about what it should be and working toward that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's the dynamic changes as you grow yourself, I'd say, too. And I think that the dynamic of raising, which is always kind of surprising to me, is before an investor comes in, the dynamic of interaction with that board member is very different than after. And afterwards, it immediately turns to, how do I make my investment strong? And if they support you as a CEO, then they're doing that. And so I remember that dynamic being pretty dramatic, particularly on an A, when we went from a sort of less mature board to a more mature board. And I do think the CEO has to have enough confidence to say, our team has this. We're going to make the recommendation. We are very open and would like the board's advice. We're not asking them for which direction we're going, but have enough confidence to then listen, truly imbibe in it, and say, okay, we've thought about that too, and some comments you may take in and others you don't. And so I think that kind of confidence of being enough confidence in your leadership, but then being open and honest and humble to that you do have this amazing board, and that kind of mojo, I guess, that it takes. You just have to find your own balance, and I think it helps. John's probably had it for so many years now that you just automatically bring it in. And I think the only final part is we just went through another round, and our board changed, and I think it's important to set the dynamic. So I actually went back and read your post again. I read some of my other friends again to kind of remind myself, and sort of said, and went back to my original, I'd written something for myself, and reasserted it at the last board meeting, actually, and said, hey, this is who I am. This is the type of company we like to run. This is how we run our management regimes. And this is the type of board I'd like you to be. And you might be like, hey, is that kind of cocky? And I think actually it's more of just, do you agree or do you disagree? Let's talk about it as a board. And so it's that kind of mix of like putting it out there in a way, but then also just being open to that feedback as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes CEOs can begin, especially when times are tough, to almost abdicate decision making. They almost want the board to make the decisions in the business, and they want to tell them the challenges and the problems. And it happens. So what I have the CEOs I work with is, come in, give the board the data, give them a sense of what you're seeing, in the big picture happening in your category or more broadly affecting the business, then the dynamics that are shifting. Let them know what you're seeing, but then push that to a so what in terms of, so what does that mean from my CEO seat, the recognitions I want to make? Doesn't mean go in saying, here's what we're doing and a statement necessarily, might at times, but go in there with a point of view that shows you push the question deeper and you've really put the work in and you're not scared to make a decision. And if the board understands the dynamics you're looking at and the data you're looking at, and they give a different conclusion, that can be a great board discussion. Or discussion about whether we should drive innovation deeper versus focus on the core. Those are all fair discussions. They're not even right or wrong discussions. But as a CEO, if you start getting concerned and making the wrong recommendation, the board's being asked to run the business. And going back to John's statement, that becomes a very unhealthy dynamic. So just don't. I'm big in the psychology of leadership, and that fear of being judged. That a boardroom, you can see some CEOs and they're looking around the room, everything they say, trying to monitor who's agreeing, who isn't. That's an impossible way to lead a company. If you're just assessing whether he thinks I'm right, he doesn't. You know, it just you got to stay internally referenced. You got to go back to here's what I think's best for the business, and open it up for discussion. But you got to be willing to push that thinking to that point, not ask the board to become that decision maker.
And what about when a member of your board suggests something that you as CEO feel is the wrong decision? How do you address that and say, like, I hear you, you're valued to me, but that's not where we're going to go, and take that decision-making power back?
I think you just have the conversation. To Brad's point, like, a good board is like watching to make sure that the team and the leadership really is thinking deeply. If you come into a room and you're like, this is happening, and I just made this decision, and here's what we're doing, and they ask 3 or 4 questions, and it's clear that you haven't really thought it through, that's a big mistake. You know, your board is there to reach out. I think one other thing I'll say that just I think builds on this is that too often people think of a board as like, it's 4 meetings a year, it's like 2 things I have to endure, or whatever. But your board is there all the time. And in fact, good CEOs and management teams work with their board all the time. They happen to get to the board meeting and they'll focus on certain strategic issues, but you know, I often am on the phone with people that are on my board asking their opinion about stuff, or hey, here's something I'm thinking about, and and be comfortable to say, like, I'm half baked on it. I don't really know. I haven't decided. I'm thinking. Here's the things I'm weighing. What do you think? That builds engagement and trust, and then when you get to these meetings, then it's much more likely that everyone will get on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's where the board meeting is actually where everybody comes together. Usually most of the choices are made in between, and most of the trust is gained in between. But it is a unique moment, actually, where you're getting all these amazing minds, if you've got the right board, trying to help you make a better company. And so, you know, I originally started with a lot more reporting in my decks, and now I'm trying to really shorten it and trying to have people pre-read it. And then we have 1 or 2 discussion topics where we're putting the work in and we're providing a point of view, but then we're saying, if I've got this great board with all this talent, like, yeah, let's hear some different views and some different opinions. And so I think there's a really nice balance. And I do think that the dynamic of how you manage, you really have to believe your board is there for you, and they're there to make you better, and you can be honest about what's not working, and use them to help that. If board members can't handle it, then it's a different dynamic. You go to those that can, and there's other solutions for that. And it's not perfect. No board is perfect. You'll figure out as you go through who can handle it and who can't. And those are the ones that obviously you would then want to continue to pick, because they can handle that volatility. And when they hear about a problem, they actually get excited to solve it. They don't be like, they're not, oh God, then you're not going to hit your quarter like you said.
And the CEO's clarity of thinking sets it up. If CEO can come in and start with, here's the big picture I see, here's how it pertains to my category, it pertains to my brand, and walk through the thinking, a board can sit there in a respectful way and see where is the divergent view of what we should do next arise. Maybe we disagree on the dynamics, you know, or fundamental implication of a certain dynamic. And if that's where the issue is, and we're sitting over here talking about the end strategy, we should be talking about what that core standing dynamic. It is, I was just on a panel about recession. If there's a fundamental disagreement on the board about the economic environment, and therefore how much risk to take or not, that's a board discussion. Let's agree on a board at that level, and then let's put it against certain decisions we're making. But that willingness to sort of provide clear thinking on how you got to your recommendation, and allow that to be deconstructed, explain how it got there. It allows the board to have an objective discussion, more an emotional discussion, versus you're right, I'm right, you're wrong. That's when boards disintegrate, when it's a right and wrong issue, versus a real sort of let's go through the deconstruction of how we got that decision and where we might have disagreements, and then talk about whether to make a judgment call either way. So, but once again, I think it starts with you're managing your board, right? Just like with your head of sales. If you don't give him clear targets and clear idea of what, you know, how you got to the strategy that he's being asked to deploy in the field, yeah, he's going to probably be a little emotional when you just say, go work harder. Get that account sold, and he doesn't think you've thought through how to sell Kroger. So,
Can I just give, we don't have a lot of time, can I just give a couple tips, like the things, I bet you he's got way more than this than me, but.
What was your advice to your younger self?
So one thing I see over and over again is management team prepares a board deck, and gets it to the board like 24 hours in ahead or less. They don't have time to read it. You end up sitting in the meeting and you're basically like gurgitating crap off of a PowerPoint slide. They can freaking read. So it's your job as a CEO and the team to set the dates back and get the board a full component of information required so that they can study, that give it to them a week ahead, really a week, and say, my expectation of you as a board member is you're going to actually read it and have understood it. Then that frees the headspace and the time for you as a CEO and the team to say, to kind of go like through Brad's progression, like here's the big picture, here's the strategy, here's the 3 things affecting our business, here's 2 or 3 strategic things we really need to talk through today, and here's what I want to spend our time on. Those board meetings turn out to be great, but if you end up having somebody reading financial statements to you, and I've seen literally that, and honestly, I've done it myself. Like you learn from mistakes, right? So that would be my suggestion: is prepare and get way out ahead of it, and don't have it be a reporting session. Have it be a strategic discussion.
And then a couple things I would say is, if there's bad news, don't bury it on page 29 of the deck or page 898 if it's a huge deck. I mean, be upfront, because if there is an issue that everyone's probably aware of happening, you had a big financial miss, and you start showing pictures of marketing demos and people smiling, and the boards, you're losing your board. Just be fearless in laying out the business. Be clear on what's concerning you, and like I said, do the rigor of the recommended actions you're taking to mitigate that. But don't bury bad news. Don't try to build up a goodwill of good news to drop the bad news. Boards do not like that experience. The other thing is, go into a board meeting and sort of similar to John said, what are the 3 or 4 things, be clear to the board, here are the 3 or 4 things to walk out of this room in 4 hours I want to be smarter on or more quick to make a decision on. Be really clear what you want out of that meeting, so it isn't just a reporting meeting and a survival, just get out of here alive type of mentality. But it really is, I want to be smart on these 4 things. You got it. What a great chance. I always tell people when they raise capital the same thing. You get to bring people into your network who are incredibly smart in general, who see a lot of things. When you're raising capital, it's because you're raising capital, so you can get a chance to talk to them. Same with the board. What a chance as a CEO to have a set of people around you that you wouldn't be interacting with otherwise, to enjoy it. It's so cool. I think it's comes from building companies, the people you put around you. So see it as that type of collaborative environment. There's governance role, but there's a Hollywood image of a board of like the board showdown. That doesn't really, if that happens, something went off the rails a long time ago that wasn't addressed. Normally the most big decisions are pretty matter of fact at the end. When you close a deal, everyone's like, signature page. It's almost anticlimactic at times, because the hard work is before. So the board's not a dramatic place. It should be a very, very down-to-earth place for open conversation. So.
I'll just compliment those.
And apologies, can you just, all of you guys, if you can keep the mics closer, that would be great. I'm getting nods from the sound guys because we're recording this for posterity.
Then I'll change my comments.
Everything I said is false.
Exactly. I think that I'll add to a couple pieces there, which is treat your board like your team. They are your bosses, but I think it's better if you think of them like your team and you figure out how to use them in a way that builds your business. And when you have that mindset, it changes the way you interact with them. I think independents I see a lot of early founders fight having a board. And maybe they don't have to because of where they're at in their capital structure. And I actually think boards they force you to once a quarter pull up. They force you to have tough discussions. They force you to look yourself in the eye around things you should be in your business. And having independence in addition to your financial investors, it's really, really important. And I do think the CEO, it can be lonely. Your financial investors are protecting their capital. The better ones are really good about separating that and just being your partner. Some aren't as good, but your independents, those are the ones that actually are there almost for you. Yes, they have a fiduciary responsibility, but they generally do it because they want to help people be better. They want to help companies be better. And so be really thoughtful about those independents and then step into your boards. And it took me a little while. I had to kind of get my own head around, oh boy, here comes another reporting, and these guys are going to come in and tell us what to do when they come in once a quarter. And that's just not the way it works. And if they actually know enough about your business and you're talking with them regularly, you get so much help you'd be shocked about. I mean, it just comes in a lot of different ways. So I'll just add that into.
I do want to touch on one thing. You mentioned team. What do you do after a board meeting with your team? Because, I came from food brands before. You knew there was a board meeting. You're preparing all these decks, and then it would happen, and you'd be like, so what'd they say? Or what's going to happen next? Do you guys go back and kind of debrief your company? Who do you talk to about what happened at the meeting?
Totally. So usually, sometimes, depends on what times of the day, but it's for sure no longer than 24 hours later. Pull everybody back together in a room. Sometimes the team is in parts of the meeting, sometimes they're in all of it, sometimes they're in none of it. But I go through, they helped prepare the materials, obviously. But I go through, here's the 4 or 5 things we talked about, here's what we thought about it, here was some feedback. I want to make sure that they feel like they understand the feedback we're getting and that they have an opportunity to give their own opinion on that feedback. And so you kind of internalize it that way. That's how I do it.
Do you talk to everyone or just senior level?
Just my senior team, usually. But when we have a monthly meeting and it's obvious to everyone else that the board has been in, I'll always make sure I spend a few minutes talking about the kinds of things we're talking to the board about. And it's the similar themes that they're hearing from us on what's important to do to make the business succeed.
Feedback comes back 2 ways. One is from your board. And so one of the better practices that I've moved to is we have a closed session on the board that's without the CEO. And then more recently, I've come back in post that and then heard their advice directly. Before that, it used to kind of emanate back out from my chairman, but it would be inconsistent. I'd hear a lot of different voices and things like that. And now at least I get one consistent where they're all hearing what each other said, and then I'd still continue to get other voices post. But I think that's been really helpful for me to continue to say, hey, very comfortable for the board to have a discussion, but then let's come back and make sure that you're being open and transparent about the way you're sharing that back out, and it's been a healthy dynamic. Relative to the team, they did put most of the deck together, so I right away that night say, hey guys, great meeting, thank you, just because it's so much work, which is good work. It gets us to a certain point. And then we always have a weekly leadership team meeting the following week, and I usually kind of bring it up as part of that, and I've taken my notes, and we sort of feedback what's relevant.
John, I have to ask, in your piece, you said that some boards have been, quote, horror shows that have sucked resources and energy and almost tanked the company. What is an example? I'm not asking.
That was for posterity there.
Yeah, you're taping this, aren't
Yeah.
you? Oh, shit.
Not specific companies, but what makes a board really that negative an experience
I would
as a
just
CEO?
say, I had lots of different versions of boards over my years at Annie's. Let's just say that, okay?
Yeah.
It's where the board, interpersonal dynamics on the board and differing agendas on the board get in the way of what's the right thing for the business. And sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, style-wise. But it can be just incredibly destructive. And especially as a CEO, especially in my early 10 years there or whatever, I was learning a lot as I was going. And so it made it a lot harder for me, actually. If I'd had the kind of board that I have now through my entire run at Annie's, I bet we would have grown twice as big, twice as fast, and made a lot less mistakes.
And I'll add, and this is actually kudos to Brad, having a chairman or that independent help make sure board dynamics are there. People are people. We end up having a syndicate, so we have quite a wide board. There's some realities to that. But if you have a good chairman, they kind of make sure that the board doesn't get too far out, and that what I don't accept is side conversations that start to happen and kind of side pedaling, and I think that's really destructive. But good chairman can kind of help you not be the only one doing it and kind of knock the board back into shape. So I think for me that's been a critical component.
Yeah, and I'll lean to something I think whether John or Ken said it. Those pre-board conversations are really important. I mean, if you're going to a board meeting with no idea how your board's going to respond to the big issues, yeah, you are opening a risk of a lot of what's going on in the business. So, it's obviously, Kenneth does have a large board. I mean, we have a 7-person board, and we have 3 or 4 other major investors who we sort of treat as board members. We're talking about 10 or 11 people. So it's a big group versus some other companies have a much smaller board situation. But those those in-between board meeting discussions keep people aligned or allow you know where their sensitive areas or those pre-board meeting discussions, they allow you, whether it's from the chairman's seat or whether it's from the CEO seat, to go in and sort of knowing already where you're going to have to navigate or where you got to direct conversation or just where you might let someone speak a little more than maybe you might think is important, but they may need that forum to speak. So that real management of the meeting itself by a CEO and a chairman can help avoid people feeling they're not being heard or that how could you tell me this now? I didn't know if this was doing this. So there's a lot of prep that for our board meeting is not where the action happens oftentimes. It's what goes on before and after.
So we're going to open up if I can get this mic on. We're going to open up the floor for some questions. If you raise your hand, I'll kind of make my way there with the mic. Oh, gosh. Okay. And I should mention, hopefully these gentlemen are sticking around maybe for a little bit to answer some questions. We'll have the sampling and networking expo upstairs. So if we don't get to your question now, I'm sure they are happy to chat about it offline a little bit. All right, we'll go over here first.
All right. Thanks, guys. So any tips on how you would transition from a relatively non-value-added board that involves founders to a value-added board, and how to mitigate the risk in that journey? And you need to transition the board, but how do you do it?
Capital rounds are a natural point when you have those opportunities to reset your board in a less difficult, less emotional way. So for us, we had all our founders on the board. We had it was a family office with a lot of other members that weren't adding as high a value. And I think you can use those moments when you're raising capital as one component. I think you have to know where you want to go to as well. And once you start going to that, it makes the discussions of who you want to take out easier. It's much more difficult in that stage where you're in the founder, non-professional capital, majority's not owned by an outside firm. That's very much about the relationship more than anything, versus later where when you're with professional board members, they know it's coming. I mean, that's very different. They know that capital associates with those board seats. So I think those early ones are the most difficult. And I often found it was easiest when I said, hey, we can get this really amazing independent board member, but we really need this seat. And they're like, well, that's amazing. We'd love to have them at our company. And it just makes it so it's not about them, it's about where we're going. So that's been successful for.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg in the sense of you'd love to have an advisor early on, help you. I mean, so it's sort of like when you go to a Whole Foods buyer after you told them 2 years earlier that you're never going to go to Costco, you're about to go into Costco, and you wonder why it's a hard conversation. Same with some of the board members. I mean, there's early investors that come in who put $250,000 into a company's angel investor. They have no knowledge of the industry. If you told them when they came on, I want you on my board, you get to be on the board for that capital. Yeah, not surprised. Things go well in the company. They get emotionally attached to being on the board, and then you have somebody go off the board. I mean, you're done with not just a business decision. You're done with their personal connection. So by chicken and egg, I mean you'd love to be going back to the beginning and say to them, hey, initially this will be a founding board. Once you raise professional capital, this is a seat we're going to bring professional capital into. We're now independent and pre-program that. But if you haven't done it, there's no easy answer to it. It takes a lot of discussion. I mean, because I do come on boards where I'm often the guy replacing one of those people, and I spend extra time with them. I'll sit down with them, meet with them, and that's what I got to do to help that CEO not put him in a situation where he's bearing the brunt of that. And but if someone has a contractual right to a board, it's a tough one.
I think we had another one over here too.
Hi, guys. Thanks. I would imagine that one of the most challenging, difficult aspects of working with your board is dealing with conflict and very strong opinions and unwillingness to accommodate or change their minds. And Brad, you were talking about how important the pre-conversations are, the ongoing conversations in advance of the board. And I know, John, in your write-up, you said as a standard process, you send a weekly letter out to your board members, right? Like on Fridays, kind of summarizing the big
aspects of the week. So how much do those help preempt these conflict, or do you have any other ideas? Is it true that conflict is a very difficult aspect to deal with in a board? And what other ways are there that you can help get over those really difficult, challenging meetings?
Okay, so I'll just start. Human beings are human beings. There are certain people who are just kind of jackasses and really hard to deal with. Like, there are. And when you have that situation, I don't really have a great answer for you, other than you got to figure out how to either get them off your board or numb the pain of them or something. But most people who are on a board because they're an investor, they're either a founder or they've been brought to the company because the company needs their skills and want them. Most people, if you're engaging them in the facts of the business, really doing a good job educating about the business and what it's about, I have found that you very rarely get to the place where it's intractable. That's been my experience. But I think it's all the things we've been talking about: getting the right information, being consistent, being honest. If a board sniffs that you're not being honest, that's just like any personal relationship. If you sniff somebody's not being honest with you, are you going to trust them more? No. Same thing in business. So those are the only tips that I could give.
Yeah, I think those are all the tips. And I think, once again, board relationship is different than any personal relationship. I mean, a bunch of us are probably married. In my case, my wife says X, and I just come back and say, no, that's not true. How can you say that about me, or how can you think that? Yeah, we're probably going to escalate into a freaking fight. If I go, okay, I get I see that perspective. I have a different view on it. So by that I mean, when I come onto boards, oftentimes they can be dysfunctional. There are definitely boards, and I see my first job is to come in that first meeting and literally model, not get in the ping pong match that's going on. So I'll often come on the board and I'll have two board members who have been at each other start to look at me to defend their side. They see me as an ally to make the case. So they say something and I go, okay, I might ask a question. So tell me what informs that view of the world, or what makes you think that? I make the other guy and ask the same question. All of a sudden, I haven't created, I've sort of broken that triangle. I've said, here's another way to look and behave. So now that sounds really human behavior, simple, but it's being on a board. If you start getting in that ping pong match back and forth, is how to use a CEO or as a board member not amplify what's going on there. And I did a lot of work, which leads to how I work in terms of, I won't get into it.
Yeah, don't get going on the psychology side.
But it really is. I mean, it's human relationships. If you pick a fight and you respond to what they pick, yeah, you're going to be in a fight.
I'll give you two quick practical. One is, if they're a financial investor that you can't take off because they have a guaranteed board seat, you have you bring other board members around that are good people, that are the type of people, and sanity is created by those in the room. So I do believe you can work around it by other board members you bring into the equation. I do that pre-call with every board member prior to the board meeting. I already know what their conflict is. I let them air it. But then I may have talked to another board member or two and said, this board member's going to probably pipe up about this, and it'd be helpful if you could provide your own perspective. And I just say it in that way, and they're intelligent people, and then the conversation happens, and they're heard, and I find that's the best way to sort of, you're not going to stop it, you just have to deal with it.
I mean, sometimes it's the rope-a-dope. I mean, seriously, there's times that a board member just needs to be heard, and they will start going. If you cut them off, then they go off the reservation. You just let them sort of go, and to get done, go, great, thanks for the input. So our next topic is, it sounds crazy, but sometimes people just need to feel like they're heard. Those are all judgment calls, like how to navigate a meeting like that. Just like with an employee sometimes. Sometimes you just got to hear VP of sales out and hear what's bugging him. Not try to fix it or tell him it shouldn't matter or he's not focused on the right things. You just got to let him vent, and then he sort of rope-a-dopes out and he gets tired. It's like, okay. So I think it's just real interpersonal basics sometimes.